It is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Christine Freeman Roth, senior tutor here at Lady Eaton College, a fellow of Lady Eaton, a philosopher who has many specialties, but especially applied ethics and other things. And she's going to give a presentation on Where Worlds Collide, Lessons from Studying and Teaching Applied Ethics. Dr. Freeman Roth.
Good evening, everyone. Homosexuality, abortion, surrogacy, euthanasia, terminal sedation, stem cell research, war, terrorism, climate change, human rights. What do all these things have in common? Well, I think each of us can connect the dots in our own way, but for me, this list of topics from my courses in applied ethics has more in common than just their appearance on my syllabus. They're all examples for me of the fundamental connection between the arts and the sciences. This evening I want to explore these connections and persuade you, if I can, that we all must develop literacy in the arts and in the sciences if we are to begin to resolve some of the most fundamental dilemmas of our time. I've been teaching at Trent for about 10 years, primarily in moral and political philosophy, and my focus recently has been in applied ethics. In addition to classroom teaching, I'm also an academic advisor, and in that job I work with students from disciplines like biochemistry and molecular biology to history and philosophy, and I try to make them make sense of their educational plans and see how their personal, academic, and career goals can come together to make some coherent sense. And all of these roles are really essential and inform the kinds of reflections that I want to provide this evening. So I want to start with a little background. I started my studies at the University of Guelph as a psychology major, and I decided early on that that was not for me. Not because I wasn't fascinated by psychology, but because I was terrified of statistics. Sorry, Josie. So I desperately searched the University of Guelph for a discipline I could do that had no math requirement, and I found philosophy. Unfortunately, it became clear to me fairly early on that I wasn't going to be able to keep that divide I had worked so carefully to craft. And when I was working on my PhD research, I really confronted this realization that I wasn't going to be able to avoid the maths and the sciences forever. What I wanted to do was explore questions about the role of emotion in morality. This isn't an applied ethics question, but it's a fundamental ethical question. And so I immersed myself in the work of philosophers like David Hume and Ronald de Souza and Virginia Held. But what I realized is I was going to have to cross some boundaries to answer these questions, because I needed to know what an emotion was. And to know what an emotion was, I'm going to have to learn about neuroscience and primate behavior, and I'm probably going to have to do math. And what I discovered was there was really no way for me to answer this moral question without understanding something from all these other areas. This isn't new in philosophy. Philosophers like Aristotle did ethics, but he also did science. And David Hume wrote about human nature, but he also wrote about space and time. But after the Enlightenment, we really specialized, and the disciplines became so unique in and of themselves that they sort of developed their own language. And so it's increasingly difficult to communicate between those languages. So I had more work to do. I had to do courses in cognitive science. I needed to do work in economics. I needed to learn about neurons and synapses and brain anatomy. And I had to do math, yes. And I discovered that in isolation, I couldn't come up with a reasonable answer. But what the key was the interdisciplinarity of what I was able to do. The problem is that I felt woefully unprepared to tackle a neuroscience course. and a statistics course and economics course. But I worked through it, mostly on my own, but with the help of some great professors. But what I really gained an appreciation for was those people who could translate from one language to another. So people like Antonio Damasio, who does research in the brain, but he connects it with ethics, and he connects it with emotion, he connects it with philosophy. Primatologists like Frans de Waal, who studies the behavior of chimpanzee society, but can compare that and contrast it with what's going on in human society. So what I really learned through all of this is, well, I had my philosophy. What I really needed was a cognitive science degree, and I could really use an anthropology degree as well. And during this time, I started teaching courses in applied ethics. And I saw those boundaries between the disciplines shrink even more. In applied ethics, we get a lot of students from outside of our discipline. So I guess it makes sense. If you offer a course in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, you're only going to get a few philosophers to stick around. But in applied ethics, for instance, right now I'm teaching a course in biomedical ethics. We get our students from nursing, for whom this is an elective course, but we also get the students going to med school, vet school, the students who are interested in pharmacy and optometry. We get students from biology, psychology, forensics, environmental science. So it's a place where we can all come together and look at some of these deeper questions. So what I want to do is take a couple of examples from the ones that I mentioned at the outset to show you how important it is that the sciences and the arts can communicate. So let's take an example of a class I'm going to teach next week. We're talking about the ethics of reproductive cloning and stem cell research in 1 week. Okay, so I need a longer time to talk about that. But really, to begin with, we couldn't have even asked the question 200 years ago. Well, maybe even 100. It didn't even make sense. We didn't have the technology. We didn't have the understanding, except for a few really futuristic science fiction writers who were maybe asking those kinds of questions. And while I, as a philosopher, can flesh out the moral issues, the ethical dilemmas, I can't really do that without an understanding of what a stem cell is, of how we harvest them, of an understanding of how much of who we are is genetic and what kinds of things can affect the genetic makeup of a human being. So I really think this is a stellar example of where those of us in the humanities absolutely need to be fluent in the language of the sciences like biology and chemistry. But it's equally important that scientists be asking these deeper moral, ethical, artsy type questions. Just as I want to ask these biological questions in my class, and I learn so much from my students. I mean, I don't have a biology degree, but to have biologists in my class and nursing students and forensic science students who, when I say, okay, so if the DNA is all the same and the genetics are right, and someone from a bio class will pop up and say, oh, in my class last week we learned about this thing, and apparently you can change the genetics. It's amazing to be in that place where all the disciplines come together. And of course, every time I teach on this subject, I realize I also need a degree in biology, and neuroscience would be nice too. Another great example is climate change. We talk about environmental ethics in an applied ethics class. There's no way you can have a coherent discussion of environmental ethics without understanding some of the science behind it. I can bring the ethical theory to the table. I can tell you about what utilitarianism would say and what virtue ethics would say. But I really need to know, what does it mean to be sustainable? I need to know whether wind turbines really offer an environmentally friendly and human-friendly alternative to oil and gas, or whether they ultimately cause more problems. And I can't do that just as a philosopher. And of course, every time I teach on environmental ethics, I realize I need an environmental science degree. But this is problematic. I'm not going to have enough time to do all this. But I really don't need a degree in all this. What I need is an openness. And what we all need is an openness to reach outside of our disciplines and explore other things. So have you kept track? So I have 3 degrees, all in philosophy. And I've mentioned 4 or 5 more that it would be kind of nice to have. And what I love about Trent not to give a little pitch for Trent or anything, but is, we bring students in and we offer students the opportunity to take courses in a variety of disciplines. Now, not everybody does it, but that is something I think that's really special about Trent. I'm sure you've had that experience when you're sitting in class and you're learning about something and you go, oh, that's like that thing we did last week in my other class. That experience of connecting ideas. I've always loved that moment. When you see the connection, and there are some amazing connections we can make between the science disciplines and the humanities disciplines. I often encounter students in my office as an academic advisor who identify themselves as science students or art students. In fact, most students identify themselves as one or the other. I suspect we have some exceptions in this room with our new arts and science program. And of course, I think this early identification of a specialty requires some discussion in the philosophy of education, but we don't have time for that here. But I do encourage all my students, but especially first-year students, not to specialize too soon, not to close those doors, because you never know where the connections might be. And so I want to encourage all students to make use of any electives they have in their program to push the boundaries, to put themselves in a position where they might make other connections and learn other things, especially when it comes to crossing the boundaries with the maths and the sciences and the arts. I think sometimes the arts and the sciences seem like two different worlds because we learn a technical language and we learn a way of doing things in the arts that's different from the sciences. But they don't have to be untranslatable languages because there are connections. What I wanted to do with my two very straightforward examples is just illustrate some of the places where they do come together, and they have to come together for us to resolve any of the concerns we have. But these worlds don't just collide in moral issues. Science is shaped by politics, history, philosophy, language. Science isn't any more pure than philosophy is. Right? Even something, very abstract like physics, high level, Big Bang physics, right? The stuff that's written on the chalkboard, I can't figure what he's saying. But you can ask questions like, why is he asking that question now? Why is that of interest? Why are the thoughts connected? Why are we understanding the world in that way? And so scientists are shaped, and science is shaped by the arts in as much as the arts are shaped by the sciences. And so we can inform each other's practices if we can just communicate with each other. My colleagues in the philosophy of science could point to countless examples of biases and influences on the sciences from history and politics. Really, my essential message is that these two worlds are far more connected than we sometimes give them credit for. In fact, I want to say they aren't two different worlds, right? They're the same. They're simply different, complementary, and equally necessary ways of exploring and understanding and shaping the world that we all live in. Thank you.